Morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning, Andrew. Morning, everybody.
Hi, guys.
A lot of internet slowness and Gmail and such.
Hello, guys. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone.
Hi, Carlos.
Hey, hey. Oh, by the way, Ted is still sick on our side, so he will not be joining us. But yeah, and I see that he had a few items that he left. We can talk about them probably without him. Anyway, I also see only 3 attendees in the list, so add yourselves, please. We have a few items, which is great. Actually, we have 10 items, so yeah. So let's start in 1 minute, so we have more time to try to go through all of them. Okay, let's start. Okay, so the first item in our agenda is Ted, was filled by Ted and Morgan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm here. I can talk about this. So, I mean, Carlos, you were a number of the people here were at the maintainers meeting last week. So, as many people in OpenTelemetry know, we've started the GA planning process. We're going to start this with the Spec SIGs because we need the specification to drive the features for each of the language SIGs. So starting this week, I want us to draft up a list of the features that we think that we need for GA that either in progress and incomplete or just we haven't started yet. I saw Josh join. We did a similar exercise in the metric spec last week. We just need to do the same exercise in the SIG for the tracing spec and any other specs that we think are in scope for GA. For metrics, I've been attending that one for a while, so I actually had some notions of what was missing. Views is probably the most prominent one, but for this group, I don't actually know. So Carlos or Bogdan, I was wondering if you could speak to that.
So I don't know if you're referring to trace part when you refer to this group.
Yes.
But
everything that isn't metrics. Tracing and like any resource information or something like that.
yes,
Context. Okay.
Yeah. Context.
So I think we started last week. We had a meeting with Andrew about classifying a bunch of the issues.
Yeah.
We haven't got to the point of drawing the line what is required versus what is not required in GA, but at least we clustered the issues into different areas in different parts of the whatever its influence and stuff. So
okay.
To answer your question, we don't know yet, but we are working on this. And we are working to have something more concrete, probably in a week or so.
Okay. Question: Do you have open issues for everything that you think you need for GA?
Ted is not in this meeting. You said
Correct. Ted is out sick, but do you have open issues for the things that are
Oh,
missing?
I have. I don't know. As
Okay.
I said, I haven't done a very good round of investigating if everything is there, but at least everything that is already recorded, we try to classify it. So
Okay.
That was my point 10 on the agenda item. Was going over what Bogdan and Carlos and I grouped last week.
Oh yeah, no, I know you grouped things. My question was just like, did we? Are there sort of outstanding items that are bouncing around in people's heads for things that we need that we haven't yet actually created an issue for?
Right. I don't think we've gotten to that point yet because all
Got
we've
it.
done was the grouping, but I've got preliminary numbers on how many issues are labeled under trace.
Nice.
Right?
Okay.
Versus how many are labeled under like, metrics and correlation and all that stuff, which I can go
Okay.
over later on.
Yeah.
One final question for this, for me at least. What version of the spec is going to be GA? Is that like spec version 1.0 or 0.7 or like what sort of milestone version are we going to target for GA?
probably 1.0 will be
Okay.
G.
Yeah.
I don't know how many intermediate versions we'll have, but once we reach the stability of GA and stuff, we should bump the version to
We'll
1.
label it 1.0. Okay.
And trying to retake your question, Morgan, I would say that we don't know exactly, what issues, but I can imagine a few important sections. Like aside metrics, we need to work on error reporting. There are a few PRs and issues around that. So that's one of the things. Then we have YAML configuration and sampling. Those are, and probably some sugar on or clarifications or improvements on context propagation. Those things are the important things that come to my mind.
Okay.
There is also, Carlos, there is a big discussion that we dropped about correlation context versus baggage names.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's actually a good call because this is the last opportunity to change.
Yeah, I mean, there is a push to change that name. I don't know where that dropped. I don't think we have any document. We stick with this name or we go with a different name. So that's, I mean, in terms of correlation context, I think maybe asking about this, maybe it took SIG for that to finalize because nobody really looked into that very, very carefully. There are a bunch of issues related to correlation context and I think we should put some more attention and effort into that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest we start by adding an issue so we don't forget at least. Otherwise, we will just mention it here and probably everybody will be so busy afterwards that we will totally.
I have one suggestion. So is that possible for this group of people to at least agree on a list of open issues that we have to resolve for spec version 1.0? So once we have the list, we can say like we believe these are all the issues we want to close before we announce the first 1.0 spec. Anything else will be in spec 2.0 or something.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
That's the intention and what we're trying to drive towards.
Yeah.
But the first step towards that, because we have like 129 open issues, was to classify them.
Yes.
And also identify some. It's like some of the things that's not going to be 1.0. We already classified like logging issues. Is like we do want to talk about logging, but that's not the blocker for 1.0. But for trace, there's like 63 open issues. Like, all right, maybe we need to also break that down. Which ones are possible? And we also need to finish tagging something. Like we got like, I don't know how many on correlation contexts labeled. Only one issue on correlation context, but if you do a search for correlation context, like you'll see that there's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 more issues on that. So we got to finish the labeling as well. Then we'll get the big groups of the things that we're like, all right, let's draw the line here and see what we got to do in a move in order to bring that in. But I mean, in the meantime, I can be safe to assume if we got some issues to talk about at this meeting, it's related to trace and it's important, we should go at it because we want to get the trace 1.0 for GA.
Yeah.
That's one of the bare minimums. I'm sure there's other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when just one last thing, when can we expect to have that list of open issues for everything that's missing?
Right.
And like, do you need more assistance? Like Andrew, it sounds like you and Bogdan are all over it. Like, I'm guessing this next week that's going to exist and we'll be good. Or
one productive meeting.
Okay.
It was good. That was last week. It took a while to coordinate because
Yeah.
of freaking getting people to be coordinated.
Yeah.
I would like to expect we can get the classification of all the labels done this week, which means we got to look through 129 issues, make sure they're labeled properly, and then come up with at least a minimum on the labeling as to like which ones we want to go in before we then dive deeper into the specifics of maybe tracing, unless we can also go on that, but like at least the grouping of that this week. So I've yet to schedule a calendar time. Today is Tuesday, so it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, one of those times that I'll need at least Bogdan, Carlos, I don't know, Riley, whether that can also, Riley can also help with that, but to be able to bring that to fruition by the end of this week. So that way, by the next spec meeting, it's more of a report on everything's been labeled and this is where we're trying to go for, at least for that. And then we can choose a milestone, whether we need a milestone before 1.0 or not. All right.
Sweet.
And
okay.
One more question. So are we also in agreement that we're not going to accept any new proposals to the spec? So starting, for example, from today or later, like Friday, we're saying any new ask that requires a change in the spec will be in like 2.0. Because my worry is like people will realize, oh, this is the last minute. I want to make some changes, and all of a sudden we start to have a lot of new issues.
I think we should, still accept issues, but just be able to trash them properly. To say we don't want these for 1.0. So maybe later, after. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Especially since I think there's actually a lot of semantic conventions for metrics that need to be done before 1.0 that have not yet even been proposed.
So maybe I should clarify like what the context of this 129 issues are. To Bogdan's point, like the 129 issues are what we have filed right now. There could be other issues that's like that hasn't been filed yet, that Riley may be alluding to, John might be alluding to, Carlos might be alluding to, just like, oh, we need something else to be able to get this to 1.0. That's not going to be done within, I'm not tracking that within this week, but
yeah,
maybe that's something the group should be able to identify. I don't know whether it's too chaotic to go after that, after this classification round, but that sounds like a fair, valid question, right?
Sounds like perhaps Riley's concern is getting additional structure around adding new requirements between now and hitting 1.0. So that we say, okay, these are the things we know we need to do. There may be additional things that have to come in, but we need to make sure that we can triage between what needs to happen before 1.0 and what can happen after.
Yeah, that's correct. That's my feeling.
Yeah, and probably add a signal at some point to say like we're now trying to stabilize the specs. We're not going to accept any new ask for the tracing API. By default, it would go to 2.0. But for metrics API, we give additional 3 weeks for people to ask something in the last minute.
Just taking notes on this. Okay.
For that, it would help if we had a general statement similar to what we had for, I'd like to propose similar to what we had for beta. It was arriving at 1.0, we're expecting certain things to be complete, not complete, so that way people can understand that if they're going to propose something, bug fixes should be, of course, be the thing to go in. It's well, geez, if you say you're going to be locking down on the tracing, there's a problem here, we got to do this, or correlation contacts, or whatnot, whatever we choose. But also knowing that's well, logging's not it. Logging's not to be part of it. If some new fandangled thing's coming, it's no, this is not a chance to throw in a wacky new feature that's been sitting in someone's brain that they want to get in. That would be out of scope as well if we put at least some general stake in the ground in terms of what we desire for the 1.0. And then we can go specifically towards the issue categorization to use that as a measuring stick as to triaging incoming OTEPs or direct changes to the spec or the protocol or something, right?
Yeah, so I'm guessing that the logic for this is like any bug fixes or clearly required spec behavior still comes into 1.0, even if it comes in hot. Like I can imagine, like even after our first release candidate, we discover something is unspecified across the SDKs, and we need to go specify it and implement it cleanly. And so that goes into 1.0. Meanwhile, new features, logging, for example, is probably the biggest one, but there will be smaller ones. New features that are not going to meet the GA date, but don't introduce breaking changes. Those will go in 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.x or whatever. And breaking changes where someone comes in and says, hey, we should completely rethink how we do tracing or metrics. That's V 2.0 or later. That's a major breaking change. I assume that's the logic we're going to use.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. That sounds good in general. Is there anything relating to correlation contacts or some other types of thing that's coming as like, well, this is kind of.
Well, I think those we should explicitly call out. So here's what I think we should do. Andrew, Bogdan, Carlos, keep going this week. Keep categorizing all of the issues we have. We should either, as part of your exercise or early next week, for things that we know are missing, right? For things that we know we need to get done before the RCs or GAs, and that don't already have issues for them, create issues for them. Just saying, this is a tracking issue because we know that we need to finish the correlation context work and rename it. We know we need to do these things related to it, and just open that as a GA issue if there isn't one already. And so then we can at least get issues just tracking all the things that need to be done, even if it's just some design work. Like even if we haven't started yet, let's just get an issue open so that we can follow it. And then ideally, we'll have called out all the things we need to do so there won't be any surprises. Obviously, there probably still will be. And we can use that to at least understand what work needs to be done as we approach GA.
Do we have enough with just Bogdan and Carlos to be able to literally create all the issues that's needed in order to fill the gap for 1.0? Or no, shake the head. Okay, so I'll coordinate that in the Gitter.
Yes. Perfect.
Back channel is like, okay, now we've categorized in if there's some things like metrics, correlation, whatever, right? That is the thing that we can continue the discussion on.
Yeah. I think we definitely need help from people to identify some of these things. We're gonna be able to categorize and stuff, but after that we need some help from people to help us with identify if we miss something. We will put our best to add by ourselves a bunch of issues, but most likely we'll miss things. So.
Yeah, of course. And that's expected. Okay. That was the end of that conversation.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so let's move to the next item. Then Ted, well, he's not here. Meeting times for new working groups added to the calendar, and errors Thursdays, 8 a.m. Pacific, and sampling Friday, 9 a.m. Okay, so yeah, that's actually a very good thing because this, as I mentioned, I think these are the two of the important sections that we still need to wrap up. So yeah, please feel free to join these meetings. Okay, the next one, Riley, naming. Should we use OT or OTL or avoid both of them? Yeah, please elaborate.
So we figured out in several spec or even the code class name or configuration, people use, sometimes they use OT, sometimes they use OTL. So I wonder if there's a standard way, at least we document in the spec or somewhere to give people guidance. Otherwise people just invent their own names.
Yeah, as you pointed out yourself or somebody else did, OT stands for open tracing. So I suggest we leave that out for a start.
Yeah. Although we already have OTEPs, open telemetry enhancements. So
yeah, and
I'm indifferent. I don't really care.
Yeah, and also the OTLP, a lot of people when they try to search OTLP, by default they got a correction from Google, it's OLTP.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember how many times people ask me are you made a typo? Is that the OLTP? And I have to explain to them. So as long as we agree on the same thing, I think eventually people will use the similar term everywhere, and the search engine will be more friendly to that. But my worry is currently people just invent their own terms everywhere.
My suggestion would be OT, even though it conflicts with open tracing, just because we already use it in OTLP and OTEPs. But that's like the only rationale I have.
Okay.
Docker Hub, we took the name OTEL.
Oh, shoot. Okay.
OTEL has been pretty widely used as an abbreviation. Okay. It seems to be like the prefix people are using for environment variables, for example.
Yeah. Completely agree with Matt. So let's go with OTEL. Maybe revisit the names of OTEPs. Maybe we call them OTEL.
OTELEPs.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I also like OTEL more, honestly.
Okay.
I wonder if we should add a very small note in the specification saying, for abbreviation, please use OTEL.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, so I will add an issue for that. Perfect. So yes, the next item then is Morgan. Should the code for context formats be stored in the SDK repos?
Yeah, this is just a quick question, and it may have already been decided, so forgive my ignorance. So there's some parts of vendor-specific code, exporters, where we said these should not be stored in the main OpenTelemetry repos. These should be stored in vendors' private repos or in contrib repos. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is for resource information, so for components of OpenTelemetry that can determine like what EC2 instance they're running on or something like that, we've decided to put that into the main repos. Is that correct? I see Carlos nodding, but no other responses.
Context format. You mean like?
Well, I haven't gotten to context format yet. I was saying like I'm just trying to understand my mental model. So exporters that are vendor specific don't live in the main OpenTelemetry repos. Resource APIs, things that can determine like what VM they're running on in Azure or AWS, I think do live in our main repos. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. And similarly, my question was for context formats. So certainly we support B3 and W3C natively, but for like the Amazon context format or the old Google one that will be going away soon but hasn't yet, should we store those? Should the logic for those be in our main repo because there's only a handful of them and they might be used in different contexts, or should those go into vendor-specific repos? I don't actually care what the answer is. I'm just curious.
Oh, I opened up an issue specifically for AWS, spec issue 637. So there's been a couple comments, and I don't think there's any official guidance at the moment. Like in Java, we've put the AWS propagator in there, but
yeah.
Should we?
I kind of figured, I kind of assumed they would be in the main repo because there's only like 4 of them really. And people like, it might be the case that like New Relic or Splunk customers have to use them in certain circumstances. So they're not really tied to backends, but I don't really have an opinion. We have a team who wants to go implement this and they're just asking where should they put their code. And if someone can tell me, that'd be great.
My understanding is those specific propagators will be in the main repo, but it will be a separate package instead of sitting in the core SDK.
Okay.
And the reason for this is, for example, like if you take like Python, we're doing integration with Flask, and they have specific headers, and doing that with like GCP or AWS Azure is just similar to that. What we've decided to put outside this repo is the vendor-specific exporters, because if exporters fail the integration test, we need someone who has specific knowledge about the backend and have access. Like I probably need to have a credit card to plug in AWS. But for the protocol, like how we interact with AWS specific header, this part I believe is well documented. It's not like.
Yep, this makes complete sense to me. I just want to double check.
One of the reasons, Morgan, when we discussed this in Java was that this is a thing, even though somebody may or may not use, let's say, Stackdriver in Google,
they'll still use the header.
Use the header to communicate with other integrations that Google offers. So even if they use a specific vendor or not, some of these headers, like especially the cloud ones, are important for everyone. because once you run in GCP, you need to use this header to propagate and communicate with other components in GCP. Hopefully that will no longer be the case in the future, but so far it is the case. So that was one of my arguments for
I think the exact same thing, right? Like there's a lot of contexts where you're going to use these. There's only a small number of them. It makes sense for them to be in the main repo. I just wanted to double check that was the case.
Sorry, go ahead, Wolfgang.
So my argument stands only for Yager, B3, and the cloud ones like X-Ray, GCP, and if Azure has one. Sorry, my ignorance, I don't know if they have their own header. But this will be probably the least of propagators that I would be willing to support and to maintain in the core repo. So to answer your question, I think we have to make a decision, and we have also to document the full list of propagators that we are willing to support.
Yeah, this was the next thing that I wanted to say, that we should definitely leave a note on the issue that John created, and have somebody cook a PR to start exploring what sections need to be added and what kind of propagators we want to support. Otherwise, we will come to an agreement here, and then we will forget to add that to the specification. So if somebody's interested in taking that part,
do you have a link to the issue? I'm happy to reply there.
John pasted it in the doc.
Oh, thank you. All right, I will reply there.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, I think we have a soft agreement on this. Okay, can we move to the next item?
Yeah, which is also me. It's my last one.
Okay, great. So go for it.
Super quick. We have a team in Australia. People have met them. They're mostly working on the collector. They're about to start working on the SDKs. We've also hired a new engineer there. I was wondering if we could start rotating the spec meeting times between this time in the morning and then a time in the afternoon, so that they could start attending that. At the moment, they're just not able to attend any of the spec meetings. They can attend the metric spec meetings because those rotate, but not this one.
I think that for the Java instrumentation, Trask is already doing 2 of them to give updates to people who are in the Asia time zones.
Yeah.
For probably, I think it depends on the specific requirements of each group.
Most of the SIGs now are rotating between times because we have a team in Australia. They're certainly not the only contributors in the Asian Pacific time zones. Mm-hmm. This is just one of the few meetings that hasn't started rotating yet. And, some of the team members there had reached out just because they're not able to attend and they would like to.
Okay, but do you think we should have a second one of this one? No. The specification one.
Oh yeah, not a second one, just like every other week, just either go at 9 o'clock Pacific and then like 4 o'clock Pacific or something the next week and then go back to 9 o'clock. Like that's what we've been doing for metrics, for the metric SIG, for example.
Carlos, you're in a time zone that would be kind of harder for you in the afternoon. He's kind of hinting at that, I think.
I understand.
We could also Armin, who has been helping in specification, he's in Austria, so same problem.
Got it. Okay, so we'd be losing a bunch of core people.
This is why for some of them there's like 2 of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not like one, it's like not just changing the time, but they just like having actually 2 of them.
I think it makes sense just for the specification to go with double, as Carlos suggested, and have some people attending both and keeping everyone in sync and stuff. I know it's a bit more work on our side, but for this specific meeting, I would like to hear opinions from all over the world. So it's not only...
Well, Morgan, was there something specifically that these Australians wanted to participate in, or they just want to observe?
It's it's more than observe. I mean, we're going to be putting the videos on YouTube. I think Sergey's all over that. But they just assume they'd have spec issues that would be coming up, and you know, I can try and represent those to the best of my abilities, but they're the people actually writing the code, and it's a lot easier if they do it.
And that's a pretty large team, right, Morgan?
Yeah, it's 2 FTEs and a manager right now. There's a third FTE we've already hired, who's joining in early July, and with more to come after that.
Okay.
And these people are like, all they work on is OpenTelemetry. That's their sole job.
Oh. Yeah. I'm fine with that. Of course, It's gonna be more work. It's gonna be more work for some people. So
yeah.
That's my only take.
Yeah. Okay. Bogdan, so your suggestion is doing basically 2 meetings on the same day, just at different times. Is that correct?
I will start initially because we don't know how much audience we'll have in the Asia and Australia. Yeah. So should we start every 2 weeks to have that meeting at 4 p.m.?
We could. Do people think that makes sense? I'm in listen mode. Just tell me what you want to set up and I'll set it up.
I don't know. Or the other option is to make it only half an hour initially. Maybe maybe just half an hour and see how it goes. I mean, this is not fixed in stones or anything. It's just like, let's start with something and see how much we need or we don't need for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And probably starting with next week because it will be a very short notice and people will not wake up at 4 p.m. equivalent in Sydney if they don't know in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah, half an hour sounds good, like a good idea to me.
Okay. And it'll be mostly just be like catch up and then any additional issues that they bring up. But this will be the main one.
Okay, so we need to schedule that call. Who can do that?
I'll take
perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great, sweet. Okay, so going to the next item. Yeah.
That's the same thing. Yeah.
Yes.
That's from James. Yeah.
James Bevington. Yeah. So basically, he pointed to a pull request that he has for resource process semantic conventions, and it's blocking. It seems it's blocking work on system metrics in the collector. So that's a rather important PR then. So far. Actually, it's relatively small. I already reviewed that. Also, Armin gave one review. But guys, if you can have some spare some time.
Looks like Josh just approved it as well.
Yeah. So I will also look after the meeting. Probably that the specification one will be accepted. Probably the more important thing is the auth head. No. My comment is for the 6, Morgan, not for 7. Yeah, so the more important one and needs more eyes is the number 7. And please, everyone review that and approve.
Yeah, actually, I agree with that. Yeah, that's way bigger, and it has more discussion going on there.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that definitely, yeah, number 7 is way more important than 6. 6 is small enough. 6, we should be able to merge it after you take a look, Bogdan. It's small enough. For 7, yeah, it's quite big.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the 7, the action item is please, everyone review that. Number 8, math.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring up this maps as attributes. And yeah, have a little bit of a discussion about it. There was recently a PR to add both array values and map values for attributes that was merged to the collector. And as that PR was coming through, I kind of revisited this issue and started thinking about it a little bit more. And like on the surface, everything seemed okay to me about it. But as I started to think it through, I started to come up with some reservations about adding this. Mainly, the things that I was looking at is that ultimately, most tracing backends operate on attributes as being key value pairs. So, these map valued attributes are going to have to be flattened at some point in the situation, or at some point in the process. And this seems like a lot of work. So if you're exporting to like Zipkin or Jaeger, for example, you're going to have to do this in process. So really for every key, for every attribute, for every span, you're going to have to derive that key by flattening this kind of nested structure in process and send it up. For backends that can ingest OTLP natively, unless they can store this nested structure, they're going to have to flatten at that point in time. And it just seems like a lot of work when we already kind of have this dotted string notation for our attributes. And I think that was kind of the point in this PR, was that this dotted string kind of notation, like http.url, http.method, is really kind of like a nested map in disguise. And I kind of agreed with that, but ultimately I think that it's kind of a compact version of a nested map. And there are like some efficiencies to be gained from it, both kind of from the tracing client side and kind of on the export ingest side. Other things that kind of came to mind as I started thinking through this a little bit more is like, right now, you know, we can do things in the tracing clients to ensure that we have like 0 runtime allocations for like common keys, common semantic conventions, just by having constant strings in that dotted notation. And we kind of lose that if we move into this nested maps structure. And then kind of like lastly, having written some code that does this before to flatten out these nested structures, like stuff gets really weird if you go from a map to an array to a map again, and you want to flatten into a key. So say, for example, you have like a user with an array of subscriptions. The subscription has like an ID and a name. It's like you end up with a key like user.subscription.0.id, user subscription.1.id to kind of like keep a unique key through that array and index the thing that's there. And like it makes the key really unusable in a lot of the backends. Like you kind of need to do some quantization on the key to even figure out like what is this thing referring to if you're trying to do some sort of like correlation. So ultimately, as I thought through this kind of on the ingest and tracing backend side, I think this is not, or maybe we should think about this before adding it to all of the SDKs.
I don't think the proposed was to add to the SDK. So let's put it this way. In the SDKs, we already have arrays, correct? It's already documented in the specs that we need to support arrays.
Yeah, and arrays, that's one thing that I commented there. I'm totally cool with arrays. I actually have no problem with them. It's like once you add the nested maps that things start to come unhinged and things can get kind of very deeply nested. I think arrays allow you a very shallow level of nesting and kind of, you know, give you kind of that list property that often comes up with things.
Okay. And so I don't know how backends will solve this array problem, if they will flatten to a map as you proposed as key.0.
So that I don't think is a problem as long as the things in your array are like simple types. I think it gets more of a problem when the things in your array are like a map and you have to keep going further down in the nested structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now we limit the arrays to, bools, numbers, strings. Yeah. So you kind of stop at that array. You don't get more levels of nesting. Whereas if you allow nested maps, it's like you can go into a map, you go further into an array, and it's just like when does it end?
Mm-hmm. So what would be your proposal?
My proposal is to allow array value attributes, but not map valued attributes.
Are you okay? That's a fair proposal. And is this one of the things that I heard from people complaining was mostly about having a better way to group things, like, okay, all these attributes are about, let's say, HTTP. So they feel having map support for that. And again, I'm not necessarily a supporter for map, but I'm trying to see if that's a good case or not. They said, if we have a map, it's much clearer that all these things are grouped together under HTTP than flattening things.
Yeah, and that's the example in that specification issue. And I admit the first time that I read through it, I kind of thought, hey, they have something here. This dotted like http.url, http.method, http.whatever. There's, more than a handful of attributes that could be prefixed HTTP is kind of like this map in disguise. And this dotted notation is kind of like, it is kind of ultimately, a map, and could be represented as one. But as I went through the exercise of thinking about how tracing backends are going to handle this, they're going to need a key value pair. So they're going to have to flatten this. So that seemed a little weird to me. So, and then kind of the next thing that I was beginning to think about is a lot of our SDKs have helpers for semantic conventions, and these end up giving you the property that you can have 0 runtime allocations for every key that's a semantic convention. Whereas you lose this with this map notation. And that was one of the other things that I posted on the spec issue that's linked there. It's just kind of like, how many objects do we need to represent this with the dotted string notation, and how many objects do we need to represent this with the nested map notation? And then that's kind of if you create everything every time, but with the dotted string notation, you can take it a step further and, reduce at least for the keys, this to 0 runtime allocations. And then, yeah. So there's a lot of efficiency, I think, by having the dotted string notation. And while I agree there's like a nice,
I was thinking of a counterexample. I've seen some libraries, not a no-tell library, but existing libraries in Go, where they take advantage of Go's structure tagging to annotate fields. So you have one struct that has 5 values in it, and it has structure tags letting you annotate the names of those fields. And then you take one value, you stick it in as the value for an attribute, and since it has 5 values, you're creating that nested map structure, but you're using a built-in facility of the language so that you don't have to have any allocations there as well. And there are examples of libraries doing that already. So I guess I was wondering if this is like necessary, or like I don't see it as a requirement to have these allocations. I think your point is that legacy backends are going to have to flatten these because there's no support for structures like structured data. And I mean, I think implicitly you're suggesting that we shouldn't just put those in string form and give them to those backends, because then those backends will be completely useless. Like, if you can't recognize map structure and we give you a string of text, you're not going to get any value out of that. So you could do the conversion downstream, though. This doesn't seem like it necessarily affects the client library. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. I don't know that every language is going to have support for the struct tags in the way that Go does. But yeah, ultimately, I think the kind of my key takeaway is that tracing backends that I'm aware of today do not natively support these nested structures. And I could be naive in this area. And for ones that don't, we are going to have to flatten these all into this dotted string notation. So I guess the concern I had is like, why not just stick with dotted string notation? Because we can do this with 0 runtime allocations and save everybody the trouble.
Yes, not necessarily. I mean, if you do the dotted, so first of all, I feel like if we support maps, we should clarify very well the dotted semantic that we have right now, which I don't know if it's very well documented that, hey, this implies maps and stuff. So I think we should at least take a step and clarify that convention that we use. And secondly, I think one option that people may have in some backends may be just, you gave an example of, you have an element, let's say foo, which has an array, and inside the array you have a map as one of the elements, and you have to do foo.0.bar, for example. Why, if people put this way, the data in this format, why not just simply JSON format the entire value? Would be a better solution for legacy backends.
That's what I was saying, I think. And it just makes that data useless in that legacy backend. Like, there's no way to query it at that point.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think this, I don't know that we're going to resolve this today. I just wanted to kind of like raise this issue and have people think about it, think about your tracing backend, think about your export needs. Think about updating like your Zipkin or Jaeger exporter in your SDK to flatten stuff, and just like experiment with things and see, is this a step in the right direction for the usability of OTel, both from the client and tracing backend side, or is it a step backwards? And I guess that was my main ask.
And to 2 points what I want to make. The first one is, I noticed like in Microsoft, we learned some hard lesson when we like try to convert from a structured data to something like foo.bar. And we realized, oh, like people already put like foo.bar in their names. So we got to escape the string. And this is very painful. So I think here we want to take the lesson and avoid that like escape. At least we want to know what the user can put in the name. And when we want to invent something like convert from a structured data to a hierarchical name, we know we're not going to stepping on the other's toes. The second one is for the schema flattening. I noticed like in the C++ SIG, we face an issue where we have the variant, and now we see there's a proposal in the spec trying to add nested data type. We start to have a question like, are we responsible for checking the like loops? For example, if you have a data structure that has a reference to itself, the SDK is supposed to like check all the loop and drop the data, give a error message to the user, or we just assume that this is user's responsibility. That seems to be too much for the SDK to do a like a cycle check.
Okay, I suggest creating an issue. I will probably add the issue myself, or Matt, probably you can, but I suggest we CC Bogdan, Riley, and JMACD for a start. I think this is very interesting, and I wouldn't like this conversation be lost.
Yeah, I'm glad the topic of cycle detection came up. That's a real issue. It's a safety issue for using the API. I think of it as a logging issue. Like, this is an issue that a logging API ought to address or explicitly not address. But I think Matt's point, going back to the beginning here, is that this is not something traditionally that tracing backend would ever care about. We're forcing them to care about if we put this into the standard. So I don't know, I'm sympathetic to the desire to have safety against cycles and that like escaping properly of your structured data. But like, we've gotten outside of tracing, I think. And I want us to see, I want to see us focus on tracing.
I want to bring up a small meta-level comment before we go to the next issue. I think the spec issue on this was accidentally closed when the protobuf PR was merged.
Okay.
Should be reopened, I think.
Yeah, I'll reopen.
Actually, that's probably better than creating a new issue. Do we have the issue in the?
Yeah.
Okay, so Riley, please, if you didn't have time to check that, please. That could be of interest to you and what you just said. Thank you so much. Okay, so going to the next item, because we only have 8 minutes left. So Matt, multiple tracer provider use cases.
Yeah, so this has come up before. It's usually me asking this question, and I'm actually supposed to be writing some clarifying language for the spec around resources. And kind of one of the things that keeps coming up is that the reason why a resource, why every span has a reference to a resource, is that you can have multiple tracer providers. These tracer providers can have different resources and kind of represent different logical applications, but hook up to the same export pipeline. So I've been ready to write this a few times. And these questions kind of keep coming up in various SIGs. And I just kind of wanted to take one step back and try to understand this multiple tracer provider situation, because it is listed in the spec as it's actually listed under should, not a must, that you can have multiple tracer providers. You can only have one global tracer provider, but you should be able to instantiate multiple in process. And all of this just seems a little bit weird to me because, well, the thing that I'm trying to clarify is how does this multiple tracer provider situation work? There's really like no API to interact with more than one tracer provider. It's like there's not really like a tracer provider to like for anybody to use this. So as far as I can tell, you can have like some kind of off the books secret tracer provider like stashed away somewhere that you occasionally use yourself. But like auto instrumentation and other things are going to have trouble interacting with this. Is that?
More or less, there are some possibilities here. For example, in Java, with the Java server application server, you can have class loaders that isolate your instances, even multiple. I mean, a lot of crazy things you can do because of the class loaders. So that's for example one possibility where you can have in the same process multiple providers. There is a good question if we should allow the same instance of exporters to be hooked into multiple trace providers. I have no good question about this. Good answer, sorry. Maybe the limitation that you are looking for is actually that you cannot share the same instance of a span exporter to multiple trace providers. Even if the user creates multiple trace providers, which is fine, you just have to create a different exporter instance for every of these.
So we've had users asking for this, and my impression in metrics and Go, and my impression is that the reason why people ask for this is that they would like to have per tracer or per provider resources, and we haven't given them an API for resources. Therefore, they're saying, okay, I'll just create my own provider with each resource for each one, and I'll just attach those to my exporter. So it's a very, I think, valid and request and reasonable. I've started to implement that support in the metrics SDK for Go because it seemed like that was the direction they were heading, although you could make this statement that it's not possible or legal to share an exporter. But then I think you've pushed people even further away from what they want, which is per tracer resources.
But what do they try to put in resource that they need to have multiple resources?
Well, we've seen lots of instrumentation where you've got some attribute that's constant for an entire body of code. It's not constant for the process, but
I think we users are misusing our API. I don't think common attributes should be put in resources. As we stated, the resource describes the application, the process.
I think that's a super slippery slope. You're never going to get anyone to agree on that. Like if my process has shard 17 as a resource, that's because the entire process is described by shard 17. Now, if I have another shard 18, and I want to have all my traces in shard 18 be automatically labeled, resource is the concept I'm looking for, whether or not, like I think that your statement that resources are the process is not well defined.
It is well defined right now. It's just people abusing that.
How is shard 17 not part of your process?
Shard 17 it is, but why do you need multiple providers for this? I mean,
because there's shard 18 in the same process.
So
there's some module of code, the instrumentation module, and it's saying every span I create belongs to shard 18. So why should I attach that to every span? It's static from my point of view in this module of code, and I'm just trying to say why this demand has come up. I think that's the reason.
I think if I'm hearing you correctly, we need, again, even if we give this support of scoping, I remember your stuff and stuff. I still believe we should keep things not in resource. We can discuss whatever you want. We can have a different object called metadata or whatever. I think we should very clearly scope the where we put things. And I think the whole idea of resource was to describe the application, describe the process running and stuff. And we can have another object which has, again, repeated attributes and stuff, which serves a different purpose than resource. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should not give the user this scoping thing, which I'm hearing right now. It's just like, I don't want them to abuse the resource. I think the resource was designed with the idea of describing the application, describing the process. And there may be implementation that rely on that all these informations are describing the process, not a scope inside the process. And we can give them another level where is the scope level, and we can have that. Does it make sense what I'm trying to say? I mean, again, I'm not.
It does. I think the semantics should be they're identical. So I'm not sure why we should do it, but that's just my opinion on the matter.
Okay. I think it will be very good to start discussing about this issue, because you pointed out very well that people will start using things that some people may not expect to be in resource. So let's discuss about that issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I suggest also creating an issue because we are out of time, sadly.
All right. Yeah. Let me just say one quick sentence, and that is.
Sure.
The whole reason I brought this up, was not so much to say that it should be illegal for two tracer providers to share the same export pipeline. I think that's fine. But the thing that's really weird to me is there's really no API that allows you to have multiple tracer providers. And that's kind of the problem that I see. And so it seems like it's a really unusual use case. And there are a lot of provisions in the spec to kind of enable it. And I think it either needs to be legitimized somehow with some formal API, or something.
Because it's like a dependency injection question. Like different languages do dependency injection differently, so that's probably why you feel confused. Because for me, it doesn't seem like a problem at all. In Go, you just create yourself a new SDK, and that's a provider. Now I've got 2. Now I create another one. Now I've got 3. I just have to keep a pointer of the thing I'm using. And there's one that's global, which is very special because we have to handle it differently. But otherwise, you just create your own providers and use them.
So I understand that. Like in a world where you're doing almost 100% manual instrumentation, you can manage all of your tracer providers and it all works out. But in a world where you have mostly auto instrumentation, like everything is going to be going through your global tracer provider. And to get something to go through one of these other ones is going to be like a lot of kind of manual management on your behalf. And so it kind of seems, yeah, it seems like there is not great API for that world, or maybe like languages in that world, this isn't so much of a use case, but we're way over time. So I'm gonna cut myself off. To be continued?
Yes, one thing that I'm hearing from you, Matt, maybe you want to file an issue is tracer provider versus auto instrumentation, and what tracer provider should auto instrumentation libraries use? In this case, I think I heard from you that most likely all the auto instrumentation will use only the global tracer provider, which is a fine answer. Probably we should document that. But in case of manual instrumentation, as just pointed, user can do whatever they want. They can get more tracer providers, and we cannot stop that. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Yeah, so let's keep talking over Gither or over GitHub. Thank you so much. See you around. Ciao.
Thank you.